My name is Dale Hutchins. I'm 54 years old. I've been swinging a hammer since I was 19, and for the last 28 years, I've run a residential contracting business out of Clarksville, Tennessee. I build things, houses, additions, full gut renovations. I know what's underneath floors. I know what's behind walls. I know how a structure looks when it's sound, and I know how it looks when it's been compromised from the inside, without anyone catching it until something gives way. I should have seen it sooner. That's probably the truest thing I can say. Her name was Renee. We were married for 11 years. She was 37 when we met at a fundraiser dinner put on by a company her friend worked for, and I was 42, already running a crew of 14, already paying a mortgage on a house I'd renovated myself over 4 consecutive summers. I'd done the floors, the kitchen, the master bath rough-in. The bones were solid. The finish work was careful. A man's house is the one job site where he can take his time. I want to tell you what the marriage looked like from the outside because I think it matters. It looked good. It looked like two adults who'd made reasonable choices at the right time in their lives. Renee was smart, careful with money, kept herself organized in ways I never could. She handled the household accounting. She paid the bills. I made the money, and she made sure it went where it needed to go. And for a long time, that arrangement felt like trust. That's what I told myself it was. Trust. I was busy. I had contracts running in 4 counties. I had a crew that depended on me to keep the pipeline full. The idea that she was handling things was a comfort I leaned into harder than I should have. The blind spot wasn't that I didn't pay attention. It was that I'd been raised to believe that a man who handles the outside and a woman who handles the inside is a fair division. My father ran a concrete business for 31 years. My mother paid every bill that ever came through that house. That was just how things worked. So when Renee took over the finances in year 2 of our marriage, it didn't feel like a handoff. It felt familiar. It felt like home. I never asked to see the statements. I'm not proud of that. But I didn't. The bathroom project started as an anniversary surprise. Our 11th anniversary was coming up in April 2023, and Renee had been talking for 2 years about wanting to redo the main bathroom. She'd shown me photos from design websites, the freestanding tub, the floor-to-ceiling subway tile, the heated floor system. She'd done the research. She knew what she wanted. I figured I'd give it to her. I had a week between projects. A job in Adams had wrapped up 3 days early, and I had a window before the next one started. I told her I was taking her to Chattanooga for the weekend so we could see her college roommate, which was partially true. Her roommate, Andrea, actually did live there, and they were having lunch. I just also had a different plan for what was going to happen at the house while she was gone. I dropped her at Andrea's on a Friday afternoon in late March. I drove back home, changed clothes, pulled the truck around to the side gate, and started tearing the bathroom apart. I want to tell you what that room looked like before I touched it. I'd done a partial renovation on it in 2018, replaced the vanity, updated the fixtures, put in a new toilet. The floor was original to the house, which was built in 1987. 12-inch ceramic tile over cement board over the subfloor. Standard. Nothing unusual. I'd been in that room 100 times. I knew the floor. I started at the perimeter. That's always where you start. You score the grout lines, get your oscillating tool under the tiles at the edge, work your way in. It took me most of Friday evening to clear the tile. Saturday morning I came back to pull the cement board. That's where you find things, usually. Not things placed there on purpose. I mean gaps in the old work, moisture damage, soft spots in the subfloor that you couldn't see from the surface. I've opened up 100 floors and found evidence of old problems that someone finished over and hoped wouldn't resurface. I pulled the cement board in sections. The subfloor underneath looked fine until I got to the section nearest the back wall, under where the old clawfoot tub had sat. There was a section of subfloor that had been cut and refastened, cleanly, professionally. Someone had used a jigsaw or a circular saw with a guide, cut a rectangle roughly 10 inches by 14 inches, and screwed the panel back down with new screws. The screws were galvanized. The original subfloor screws were not. It stuck out the way a new patch in old drywall sticks out. You might miss it with paint on it, but once you're looking at bare material, it's obvious. I sat back on my heels for a minute. I've been in the trades long enough to know when something was done deliberately and when something was done to cover something up. Those are different categories. This was the second one. I got my pry bar. I worked the screws out carefully, set them aside, and lifted the panel. Underneath, in the cavity between the subfloor and the first floor ceiling of the room below, was a gray polypropylene zip bag about the size of a hardcover book. Sealed. Inside the bag, wrapped in a piece of cloth that turned out to be a cut-up flannel shirt I didn't recognize, was a smartphone in a black case. I sat on the bathroom floor for a while before I touched it. My first thought, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, was that I was about to open something that was going to change the shape of everything I thought was real. I've been in construction long enough to know what it feels like when a structure is about to fail. There's a moment before the actual failure where you can feel the weight shift. The load redistributes. Something that was braced wrong for years finally can't hold it anymore. That's what that moment felt like. I picked up the phone. It was a Samsung, not a model I recognized Renee using. Our carrier is AT&T, and we've both been on iPhones since before we got married. The case was plain black, no distinguishing marks. I powered it on. The battery was at 11%, which told me it hadn't been charged in a while. Maybe weeks, maybe longer. There was no lock screen pin. It opened straight to the home screen. I want to be careful about how I describe what I found because the specific content isn't what this story is about. What matters is the shape of it. There were text conversations going back 18 months. There was a man whose name I'll call Marcus because I'm not going to put his real name on the internet. There was a second phone number I didn't recognize that appeared to belong to a woman, based on the messages. There were photographs. There were voice memos where Renee's voice was clear and unmistakable, and where the things she said about me were said in the casual, contemptuous tone of someone who'd stopped trying a long time ago. And then there were the financial messages. That's the part that changed the temperature in the room. Over a span of what looked like 8 or 9 months, there were conversations between Renee and Marcus about money. Specific money. There was a reference to an account I didn't recognize, with a partial number. There was a conversation about the business account that didn't match any account I'd set up or authorized. There was a reference to a filing, her word, filing, that I didn't understand the context for yet but felt wrong immediately. I took photographs of every screen I could get to. 87 photos total over about 90 minutes, working through a battery that was draining down to nothing. When it hit 3%, I stopped and plugged it into a charger I had in my truck. Then I called my attorney. His name is Roy Clements. He's been doing general business and civil work in Montgomery County for 31 years. He handled the LLC paperwork when I first incorporated Hutchins Contracting in 2009. He handled a vendor dispute in 2017. He's not a divorce attorney, but he's a man I've trusted for 15 years, and when I called him at 10:40 on a Saturday morning and told him I needed an hour of his time that day, he said he'd be at his office by noon. I drove to Roy's office with the phone in a sealed plastic bag in my jacket pocket. Roy listened to everything without interrupting. He looked at the photographs I'd taken. He asked me 3 questions. Did I understand the phone was found on my property? Was the marriage still legally intact? And did I have access to any household financial records? The answer to all 3 was yes. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect the confrontation to be the story. It isn't. The confrontation is just the moment the load finally transfers to where it needed to be. Everything before it was the actual work. Roy referred me to a family attorney named Beth Kapoor, who has an office in Nashville. I called her Monday morning. She had availability Thursday. In the 4 days between Roy's office and that Thursday, I did a number of things. I went to the county courthouse and pulled every filing in our names going back 5 years. I found a deed transfer I hadn't signed. Or rather, I found a deed transfer with my signature on it that I hadn't signed. The property was a vacant lot in Cheatham County that I'd bought in 2019 as a potential build site. That lot had been transferred to an LLC I had no knowledge of in January 2022. My signature was on the transfer document. It wasn't my signature. I pulled 14 months of business bank statements from the contracting company that I'd never actually reviewed in detail because Renee handled the business accounting as well as the household. There was a vendor account that had received recurring transfers, $3,200 every 28 to 32 days, going back to March 2021. The vendor name was a company I'd never heard of. I couldn't find them in the Tennessee Secretary of State's business registry. I built a binder. This is what I know how to do. I've written more RFIs and change order logs than I can count. I know how to document a project. I compiled everything in chronological order. The phone photographs, the county records pull, the deed transfer, the bank statements, the vendor payment history. I printed everything. I labeled everything. I cross-referenced the dates in the phone messages against the dates of the financial transfers and found 9 overlapping events where a message discussed an amount and a transfer of that amount occurred within 72 hours. Beth Kapoor looked at the binder for 40 minutes before she said anything substantive. Then she said, "The signature on the deed is going to matter a lot. How certain are you it's forged?" I told her I was certain enough that I'd stake the lot on it, and she said that was probably going to be accurate. Renee came home from Chattanooga on Sunday evening not knowing I'd found anything. I want to say that plainly because it's important. I did not confront her. I did not give any indication. I finished the bathroom rough work, put a temporary floor covering down, and told her I'd hit a subfloor issue that meant the project needed to be paused. She seemed irritated but not alarmed. I watched her move through the house that Sunday night the way you watch a structure you know has a compromised member. You don't put any new load on it, you just watch. I slept in the guest room, which I'd been doing 3 or 4 nights a week for the last year anyway. She didn't comment. Bess filed the divorce petition on April 4th, 2023. She also filed a motion accompanying it that referenced the deed transfer and requested the court to preserve the asset pending forensic document examination. I wasn't present when Renee was served. I was at a job site in Springfield doing a walkthrough on a framing inspection. I remember exactly where I was standing when Beth called to confirm service. I was at the north wall of a half-framed ranch house, looking at a window opening someone had framed 2 inches narrower than spec. The forensic document examiner cost $4,200. She determined within 3 weeks that the signature on the Cheatham County deed transfer was not mine. That finding was filed with the court. The deed transfer was voided by the court 62 days later. The LLC that held the account receiving the vendor payments turned out to be registered in Nevada, under Renee's name and the name of a woman I'd never heard of. The transfers from my business account to that LLC over the preceding 28 months totaled $91,400. Renee had an attorney, of course. There were negotiations. There was a mediation session that lasted 6 hours in a conference room in Nashville that I am not going to describe in detail because some of it is still subject to a confidentiality agreement. What I can tell you is that by the time the mediation ended, the outcome was not what she had planned for. The Cheatham County lot was returned to my sole ownership. The $91,400 was treated as marital waste and deducted from her share of the marital estate. Her attorney made several arguments that I won't dignify by repeating here. Is there something about this you're sitting with right now? Maybe a situation where something felt off but you couldn't name what it was. I'd be interested to know what you think when this is over. The divorce was finalized in November 2023. We'd been married 11 years and 3 months. I want to tell you something honest about what came after, because I think the honest part is the part that matters most. I finished the bathroom in December. The freestanding tub she'd picked out, I'd already ordered it before I found the phone. It was in a box in the garage. I put it in anyway because it was the right tub for the space. The heated floor went in. The subway tile went in. I did the work myself over 3 weekends, which is how I always do the finish work on my own house. My hands needed something to do. I don't regret the renovation. I don't regret the marriage entirely, though I'm still working out what the right word is for 11 years with a person who is operating a separate version of her life inside the same walls as yours. I think about it the way I think about finding rot behind a finished wall. It was there the whole time. The wall looked fine. The problem didn't start when I found it. My daughter from my first marriage, her name is Kara, she's 26, lives in Nashville. She came over the first weekend after the divorce was final and we made breakfast together in the kitchen. Scrambled eggs, same way my father made them. Low heat, no milk, pulled off the burner before they're set. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and we didn't talk about any of it. We talked about her job. We talked about a road trip she was planning with her friends. The house was quiet in the way a house gets quiet when the right thing finally stops pretending to be the right thing. I went back to work on a Monday. I had a permit pull in Robertson County and a pre-construction meeting in Clarksville at 9 a.m. I remember standing on a job site that morning, reading the plans, smelling the cold air and the turned dirt, and thinking, this is the part I know. I understand load paths. I understand what carries weight and what doesn't. I understand the difference between a structure that was built right and one that looked right. I built something real. Someone tried to dismantle it quietly, from the inside, over a period of years. They picked the wrong man for that. I still build things. I'm still in Clarksville. I still do the finish work on my own house myself, because I like knowing what's underneath the surfaces. I know that bathroom better than I know most rooms I've ever worked in. I know exactly what's under the floor now. There's something about that I find I don't mind at all.